I started the Real Mental podcast because it bugs me when film and TV miss the mark about how mental health gets portrayed. Real Mental is a podcast where a film-loving psychiatrist, that's me, talks to a film critic to help people figure out their lives by getting to the truth about mental health in the movies. Welcome, Chris Klimek, to the Real Mental podcast.
Thank you, Marcia. Hi.
Hi there. So tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Well, I've been a contributor on film and other subjects, but primarily film with NPR for a number of years in the Washington City paper and some other outlets that are unfortunately no longer extant. My day job is with Smithsonian Magazine. I am the host of our new podcast, There's More to That, which just launched and does not primarily cover movies, although we did launch with 2 episodes addressing Oppenheimer and Barbie, which fortunately these films have remained in the conversation over the last few weeks by being even more successful than projected. So that was a good bet.
And now we're going to talk about a film that was perhaps not as successful,
Yeah.
but very interesting. And we can talk about a little bit why you think it wasn't as successful. But I thought maybe we could start with your thumbnail review of the film, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Yeah, I was well pleased by this. I mean, I approached it with some measure of trepidation, more because Steven Spielberg did not direct this film as he did all of the prior Indiana Jones movies. Also, George Lucas, who was, the other big creative voice, who I think actually created the character with Phil Kaufman. I think I'm right about that. And, in the past, Spielberg had actually described himself as like a director for hire working for George on these movies. But Spielberg is involved in this one as an executive producer, I think. Lucas is totally out of it. James Mangold is the director here, who has made a number of films that I like very much. So, I mean, I think he is a good inheritor of the mantle. But I really like the movie. I mean, there were elements of it that that I disliked slightly that have more to do with my just overall impression of how blockbusters have changed over the course of a generation, which, whether or not we want to count 2008's Indiana Jones and the something of the Crystal Skull. I think I'm missing a word there.
Kingdom of the
Thank you.
Crystal Skull,
Yeah.
yeah.
I was going to call it the city of the, yeah, but good. We got there. Yeah, but I mean, blockbusters, these types of movies that are meant to appeal to as broad an audience as possible, and still in some cases, as with this Indiana Jones, but not always anymore, tend to come out in the summertime. They've just changed a lot over the course of 30, 35 years since this series was really prevalent, and those changes are reflected in the technique of this film, not just in the story, which I'm sure we're gonna talk about, the way it deals with aging and questions of one's continued relevance in a different phase of life. Yeah, overall, I really liked it. I can get into specific things that I thought were strong if we want to, but yeah, I was thumbs up on the whole.
Well, I liked it too, actually. And I was surprised that it didn't do as well in the box office because I thought overall, yes, I also had a few problems with it, but I felt like overall it was very enjoyable and also touching. Maybe we could start by you giving a little synopsis of the story, and then you can let the listeners know what you did like about it.
Sure. All right, so the film opens in, I think, 1944. There is an extended prologue, almost half an hour long, I think, where through the miracle of digital technology and a lot of apparently unused footage of Harrison Ford from many prior Lucasfilm affiliated movies, we are watching the young 40-something-ish Indiana Jones that we remember from the earlier films on a mission to reclaim some looted artifacts that the Nazis have taken. So there's an entire first act set in the World War II period, and then we jump ahead 25 years to 1969, where we meet an aged Indy who is now teaching at Hunter College in New York City. I'm not sure, but I think he was introduced to us as a Princeton professor in the earlier films. So there's an indication that his fortunes have changed. He's divorced. He feels out of touch with the times. There's a very funny segment where old man Indy is pounding on the door as his younger neighbors are blaring, I think it's Magical Mystery Tour, the Beatles song, and celebrating the Apollo 11 moon landing. So, he's divorced, he's out of touch, he is on his heels. And then a young relative of his, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who turns out to be, I think, the daughter of a character we were introduced to during that 1944 segment, tells him that she has kind of picked up on this mystery, searching for one of these artifacts that Indy was in search of in 1944, and asks his help. And reluctantly, because Indy has to be reluctant. He can't do anything eagerly. This is essential to the character. Agrees to help her, and there's a whole mystery concerning this character played by Mads Mikkelsen, who is clearly a riff on the actual historical figure of Werner von Braun, who was the former Nazi who then became part of NASA and was given sanctuary in the U.S. in exchange for his help with the space program. So the villain is clearly based on von. I mean, it's a fictionalization, of course, but large, taking inspiration from von Braun, where this character, who we meet briefly in the 1944 section, is now this valued American asset in 1969. When it turns out that he's up to no good, he has a degree of official U.S. government protection because of his great value to the space program. So that's another obstacle for Indy to fight against.
For sure. And then I think it's his goddaughter.
I think that's right.
Woman.
Yeah.
She kind of betrays him and hoodwinks him, and then kind of turns around and realizes that maybe she shouldn't be such a reprobate, and kind of sides with him and takes care of him.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I really appreciated about that character, who we should say is Phoebe Waller-Bridge, if we haven't, wonderful actor, wonderful writer. Did not contribute to this film as a writer, I don't think. I think she's just here as an actor, but she's terrific. And I think her character has a similar arc to what we saw from the young Indy. The second film, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, is actually set prior to the first one, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And, so we see a more kind of mercenary Indy in that one. He's out for fortune and glory kid, as he says in the film. And, his nobler, more heroic, self-sacrificing traits kind of develop over the course of subsequent films. But in the beginning, he wasn't necessarily doing everything he does out of altruistic motives. And certainly that's true of the Phoebe Waller-Bridge character, who finds her more heroic self as the film progresses.
For sure. So what was it that you liked specifically about this film?
The most crucial element to me of its success is the way that it makes a virtue of Harrison Ford's advanced age. He is 79 years old, I think, during most of the shooting of this film. I mean, as with many big blockbusters, this is a film that was shot almost 2 full years prior to when it was released, and the production went on for a long time, and COVID and all these other factors. But Harrison Ford, who in real life is even older than the character he's playing in this film, I didn't completely try to reconcile the math, but I think Indy is meant to be in his 70s in this film anyway. And, this is something that James Mangold, the director and one of the credited screenwriters, has talked about, is like the many, many prior drafts of this film that existed just tried to sort of ignore the fact that Harrison Ford is an old man now. I mean, a tremendously handsome and fit and spry old man, but still. And he felt like, no, we have to address this. We have to make this the theme of the story. And especially when the MacGuffin, the dial of destiny, turns out to be a device that enables, at least under limited and specific circumstances, time travel, having that be sort of the engine for a story about an older character who is looking back on their life and, reinvestigating some of their old decisions and nursing some regrets. I just think that that's a smart choice. It brings a real level of emotion to, what otherwise is kind of a mechanical chase. And I say that lovingly. I mean, no one was ever better than Steven Spielberg at setting up these elaborate action set pieces where, you have to track, this character is chasing the truck while the other one is driving the truck. And there are just multiple spinning plates that are always rendered with great clarity and tension in the Spielberg films. And so that's always been something that people come to these movies for. And it's not that the other ones don't have a strong emotional core. I think most of them do, but making the fact of aging and questions of regret and irrelevance the real emotional engine of this movie, I think is the element that made it most rewarding for me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And one of the things that happened at the beginning that you didn't happen to touch on was that they have a retirement party for Indy
Of course.
right at the very beginning. and they give him some stupid gift which he
Yeah.
immediately dumps in the trash bin as he walks out of the school. But he's I think teaching a class right at the beginning, and he's kind of just phoning it in, and the
Mhm.
niece or the goddaughter is sitting in the class actually, and she has all the answers, like she knows everything,
Right.
she's already been studying. But Indiana Jones is kind of just phoning it in. He's lost his passion for it, and
Yeah.
then he retires and he's kind of grumpy, and then at home his socks are on the radiator and he's drinking whiskey in his underwear. And it's like he's so consumed with regret, especially around the loss of his son and the loss of his former wife.
Mhm.
He's so consumed with regret that he's almost punishing himself, right? He's almost neglecting himself on purpose because
Yeah.
he's so filled with self-loathing. And so he has no joie de vivre, he has no motivation, no energy, and he's just going through the motions. And then this young woman comes into his life, and it's an interesting thing because she's kind of like the symbol of his old self, right? Like you were
Yeah.
saying, she's
Yeah.
the old, wild, free, slightly immoral, slightly, greedy, risky,
Yeah.
reckless.
She's a swashbuckler,
Yeah,
she's a thief, she's a con artist, and we like her because she's good at it and she's very charming and fast on her feet and funny. But yes, I mean she has those same roguish qualities that we saw in the old Indiana Jones and in characters like Lando Calrissian in The Empire
yes.
Strikes Back. I mean, this is a rich archetype and Phoebe Waller-Bridge plays it beautifully.
Right. And then she kind of revives him, right?
Mm.
He finds his relevance again, right? In having a relationship, like
Yeah.
a meaningful relationship as a mentor, and but it's a much more equal relationship too. He's not protecting her. In many cases, she's protecting him, which is kind of a nice twist, that the woman is rescuing the guy in the
Yes.
film.
Well,
And
and mercifully, it's a more of a paternal type of bond than an attempt at a romance, and I say that only because, although I do think Hollywood on the whole has gotten a little better about this, certainly in
yeah,
the '80s and '90s when we would frequently see 40-something stars, like, as Harrison Ford was then,
yeah,
and here's the 22-year-old woman who plays your spouse,
yeah.
and certainly I again, that problem has not entirely gone away, but I think it is better than it was, and I'm very glad that, there was no attempt at a romantic relationship with Indy until if we wanna talk about, the end of the film.
Sure, we can give the spoilers.
Okay, I guess it's been out for a while. Yes,
Yeah.
we do have a brief but very welcome return of Marion Ravenwood. Karen Allen from Raiders shows up at the end. She and Indy did marry at the end of Crystal Skull, and over the course of this film, we find out it's kind of a big reveal, the tragic event that poisoned their marriage. But I think we're all glad to see both parties willing to give it another shot at the end.
Yeah, and it was a beautiful scene because, in so many films, old people don't have a love life,
Right.
right? They don't
Mhm.
have romance. They don't have, that passion. And in their very simple embrace, you can see how much feeling there is between them. And that's also a credit to the actors, the two
Yeah.
actors. But it was such a beautiful film. You could really feel how much they still cared about each other. Well, clearly he cared about her, but that she also cared about him, and that she was willing to come back and give it a try again. And that was so beautiful. And it sometimes, in the films, we see people who are old and they're kind of just like grandparents. But in this
Right.
film, they get to be vibrant, they get to be passionate, they get to be romantic. And it was especially touching because through the film he's thinking about her, he's having regrets, he's almost on the verge of giving up because he feels that he has no chance of
Yeah.
reconciling. And it's such a tragic thing. It's his biggest regret,
Yeah.
right? And so for him to be able to reunite with her at the end is very moving. And I think that on the mental health level where I'm looking at it
Mm.
from, it really shows that you can be in your 70s or 80s and you can still have very passionate attachments, romantic attachments, and really suffer the loss of these attachments, and that your feelings don't decay as you get older, your feelings
Yeah.
stay alive.
There has been, I think, going back to the '80s, really, like we've had this whole generation of blockbusters and specifically action movies where we'll give our male hero some form of regret, something that we're not going to address head on. We're not going to make it a story point, but it's just there, kind of present there as their given circumstances. There's a widow, or there's an estranged child, or there's we do this for like a little kind of easy shading to make this a three-dimensional character, but it's not going to affect the outcome of the story in the way that I think it actually does here. And if we can. Again, the film has been out for 6 weeks or so. Certainly, it sounds like we both encourage people to see it if they're, on the fence about whether or not to. But if you're listening to this and you've decided you want to see it, but you haven't yet, cover your ears for a minute or so, I guess. But there is this big third act twist in this movie where Indy and Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character Helena, I think,
Yes,
yeah, but
Helena.
and the rest of their Nazi abductors, and that they find themselves back at the siege of Sicily. I am going to get the year wrong, but I think this is 3,000 years in the past, or
Yeah.
something like this. But Indy gets to be a firsthand, on the ground observer of an era that he has only studied. He has spent his career examining the relics of, and there is a brief moment when we think Indy is just going to choose to stay there, and I was sitting there in the theater thinking, this would be a fitting end to Indiana Jones. I would actually be well satisfied by this. And the film has other ideas. It lets you sit and contemplate the possibility for a second, and then there's the sunnier outcome where Helena actually clocks Indy. He wakes up back in 1969. So hell of a punch. I don't know how long exactly Indy was unconscious, but in any case, she has decided, over the course of their adventures together, that she can't just leave this guy behind. She is actually going to try to kind of force him to attempt to reconcile with Marion. And I certainly inferred, although that we don't see the scene, that she must have been the one who called up Marion and said, "Hey, would you come over and
Yeah.
see if you can manage to talk things out with
Yeah.
Indy," which
Yeah.
is a very satisfying conclusion if you've followed these characters over decades as I have.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, when he wanted to stay, you can see two reasons. One, it's because obviously it's an era that really does fascinate him, and an
Mhm.
area of study that is, he has passion about, but also because he's given up on his life.
Yeah.
And so he feels he has nothing to go back to. And it's, in a sense, really like choosing to die, right?
Yeah.
Because he's not going back to his world. So it's kind of the ultimate giving up. But as you said, Helena has different thoughts about it. And I think she has come to love him and feel protective toward him. And so she does what she needs to do to get him back on the time travel machine and back to his own
Yeah.
life, where like suddenly he has family, because he's not sort of beating himself up over his remorse. And so he's not pushing people away. He's letting his old friend, played by John Rhys Davies,
Yeah.
come over with the grandkids, and Helena's there, and then Marion shows up. So suddenly he's surrounded by life, by children, by young people, by his wife. He has a life again that, because he had so much regret and self-loathing, he was pushing everything away. And you can really see how, when you feel bad about your choices and you beat yourself up, then you punish yourself and you make things worse for yourself, because you isolate yourself and then you suffer even more. So it's this kind of vicious circle of
Yeah.
regret, self-recrimination, self-isolation, and depression. And I think that's where he was. He was in a depression. He's drinking in his underwear in the evening alone, and
Yeah.
getting angry at
That's
his
right.
happy neighbors because they were having fun. So he kind of came back to life. This adventure brought him back to life and back to love.
Yeah, there's a really nice echo of the third film of Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade, which, as part of the conversation around this movie has been, well, where do you rate it? There are 5 of these films. Which is your favorite? Which is what I've found out is that although Raiders from 1981 seems to be the acknowledged champ, it's the most one with the most brilliant execution. A lot of people prefer Last Crusade, where we have Sean Connery as Indy's father, as Henry Jones Sr., and clearly they have a fractious relationship. And, over the course of attempting to track down the Holy Grail together, their relationship is healed. That
Yeah,
becomes the treasure that they actually both gain in the
right.
course of, quote unquote, losing the one that they thought they were pursuing. And it's wonderful casting. Sean Connery and Harrison Ford, even though Sean Connery is a mere 12 years older than
Yes.
Harrison Ford. So that, we can hand wave that away. They kind of age him up. And, this is peak Harrison Ford. I guess he's in his mid 40s at this point. And it's just it's a wonderful relationship. It's a really fun, warm movie to revisit. And, so coming up with sort of an emotional anchor for the new movie that would hit in that way was no small task, but I think they pulled it off.
And that's a really great insight
Mhm.
that this current movie is kind of like an echo of that
Mhm.
other movie, because you're right. In this movie, the Dial of Destiny was supposed to bring them back in time so they could have a do-over,
Right.
right? And if Harrison Ford wanted, he could have, taken himself back to before his son passed away or something like that. But instead, he says this is not something that we should have, and this is not
Yeah.
a toy that people should be playing with. It's very dangerous, right? Because the Nazi wanted to, do over,
Yeah, that I mean,
Hitler's
that was
losses, right?
right. And I mean that was kind of a nice riff on the philosophical question. Well, if you could go back and kill Hitler, would you have done it, and prevented the Holocaust? And here's a Nazi who answers this question, yes, because Hitler was an ineffective genocidal tyrant. I could have done it better, and I will do it better if I get my hands on this device. So,
Ugh.
again, that's a bit of a swerve from what you expect to happen. It's not that he's going back because he's going to continue Hitler's glorious work. It's because he thinks Hitler was a bumbler and he could do it better.
Yeah, it's really he was a good bad guy.
Yeah.
But what I really liked is that that's the prize, as you were saying, was not the Holy Grail in the Last Crusade, and it was not the Dial of Destiny in this. It was the relationships.
Yeah.
And in the Last Crusade, it was the one with his father. And in this one, I think it's his relationship with people, just people in general. Because and in the end, he's not just with Marion, he's with Marion and Helena and his old friend and the grandkids. Like, he's surrounded by all this love. And so it's like the real prize in this movie is that he gets to have his heart opened again and be loved and give love and be a human again, and
Yeah.
not just this, miserable, depressed guy sitting and drinking alone in the
Yeah.
afternoon.
I think that's the great challenge of actually pulling this off in a movie, because when we describe this, it's almost doing it in terms that are not completely trite or maudlin is very difficult, right? Oh, the real prize were the friends we made along the way, and we're all cynical about that and think we've seen it all. But then when you see it executed properly, where the storytellers build your emotional investment over time, and if they do it right, as I think this film does, it just disarms you. You forget about all of your sophistication as a viewer and your, all the kind of reflexive cliche avoidance, and just kind of surrender to it. And you don't feel like a sap for surrendering to it. It is a rewarding experience.
For sure. And the other thing that I think they did so skillfully is they didn't resort to that old trope of, the wise old person. Once you get to 80 years old, you're all wisdom and beneficent, or the crotchety old person,
Right.
these like sort of cliches. So he was this depressed old person, really. He was
Yeah.
this very hurt, sad, miserable old person who, through the course of the movie got healed. And I thought that was wonderful, how engaging in something meaningful and having loving relationships was the cure to his depression, which actually, as a psychiatrist, I can say that that would be advice I would give to people. And now let's pause for a quick word about my other podcast. I'm Dr. Marcia Sirota. We all need to be inspired and uplifted these days. We need a good laugh, and we need to be moved. In the Ruthless Compassion podcast, I speak with a wonderfully diverse group of people. They've overcome daunting obstacles, and they're making unique, exciting contributions to our communities and to our world. The Ruthless Compassion podcast is at 145 episodes and counting. Why not have a listen to it today?
Yeah. I mean, I think one other thing that is very satisfying and compelling about this is the way that it's interpolating what we know about the public persona of Harrison Ford, the actor, and his sort of ambivalent relationship to this character and Han Solo, over the decades. I mean, there was clearly a period of his career when he was like, I'm done with this. I'm an actor. I don't want to be associated with these two massive global successes forever. Hey guys, I can do other things. That was fun, but I'm moving on here. And certainly that's something that he's reckoned with over the years, and he did stay away from these characters for long periods before eventually returning. But there is a meta element to this, in the same way that Indy has had to find his way back into the modern world and find things to embrace in it. I think Harrison Ford has had to get over being like, it doesn't. Yes, Witness is a wonderful movie. You're terrific in 42, the Jackie Robinson movie, in a supporting part. Yes, you are capable of doing other things, and we appreciate it. But the fact that you are recognized and loved from these couple of larger than life characters is nothing to flee from. So to see him come back and embrace it again, if you're an old fan, is very satisfying.
And I think what I like about both of those characters is that they're not your typical hero. They both have some
Yes.
edge, right? And the typical
Mhm.
Hollywood hero is a little bit bland, I find very often. But the thing I like about both Han Solo and Indiana Jones is that they're edgy characters. They're not nice guys, so to speak, and
Yeah.
they're a little bit anti-hero. So
Right. I
they're
mean,
more
I think
fun.
it's, yeah, the Bogart character in Casablanca is almost like the model for this, right?
Yeah.
He's like, you kind of know, no matter how much he protests about how I'm not going to stick my neck out for anybody, and I'm just in it for myself, and I got to take care of number one, and he is going to reluctantly find his way to doing the heroic self-sacrificing thing in the end. And I think Indiana Jones is a character, and Harrison Ford as a movie star is like very much in that tradition, where that reluctance. I mean, there's a real paradox here. Like in the same way, this might sound like sort of a far afield comparison, but I think the United States is reluctant in many cases to elect someone who seems too eager to be president. When we have candidates who have been preparing for this their entire lives, we're like, no, we want someone who can position themselves as an outsider, as a rule breaker, as a firebrand. And often that's disingenuous and false, right? But I mean,
Right.
we buy it.
Yeah.
And I think this is I mean, this is unfortunately because we are, increasingly relating to politicians and public figures the way we have always related to movie stars and
Yeah.
celebrities. But
Yeah.
yeah, my point is simply is like, we don't want you to seem too eager. We don't like that. They have to play it a little bit cool, and and we know and they know. But I think this is essential to the appeal of Harrison Ford, as no one becomes a movie star by accident, but
Yeah.
he has at least made us believe, he would have been just as happy being a carpenter. I could take this or leave it. And it's absurd, but I do believe it when he wants me to. And again, I think that public persona bleeds into the character in a fruitful way.
Yeah, the reluctant hero, which
Yeah,
we
yeah.
we like that reluctant hero.
Mhm.
Yeah. We have a little bit of scorn toward the eager hero.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great analogy with the president. I also think it's related to how we have conflated political office with, being a social media star and being a movie star. We
Yeah.
don't realize that they're two very different things with very different meaning and very different consequences, very
Yeah,
different
I
stakes.
I I and let me make clear, I do not think this is a healthy
Yeah.
development or anything that we should
Yeah.
celebrate or nurture.
Yeah.
I think it's very bad and dangerous, but I do think it is what has happened.
Yeah, no, I sadly agree with you. Before we go, I thought maybe you could tell me a couple of things that you didn't find to be so great about this movie, like parts that you thought were
Sure.
like, I'm not sure about that.
Well, something that I have noted in a few pieces that I've written is just the expansion in length of blockbusters over time. I mean, this is the longest of the 5 Indiana Jones films by 15 or 20 minutes. I think there's a little bit of bloat on it. And I am not someone who, I mean, I am a more avid movie fan than the average person, certainly. So I have more time in my life for movies, and I'm less likely to complain when a movie is running long. But that there, had this decided to more emulate the form of the earlier films, in the same way that, like, just to grab what I think is a relevant example, Top Gun Maverick from last year, which is of course a 35 years sequel to a
Mhm.
1986 blockbuster, is a little over 2 hours long, which by 2023, or I guess it was 2022 standards, is svelte and light on its feet. That would have been a long movie in 1986, but now Like you kind of like any Marvel film, or like you kind of expect them to be 2.5 hours plus. That's one thing. I mean, I do like James Mangold as a director very much, but I don't think he has the same kind of precision and crispness to the action sequences that Spielberg has. And again, that's an incredibly high bar. Spielberg is a not even a once in a generation talent, right? A once in every few generations. So, yeah, like in that early 1944 set piece, which is an extended chase aboard and on top of a train, which happens largely at night and in the rain, which is cinematic, but also helps you disguise things in terms of visual effects. Maybe is an attempt to lighten the load on the digital artists who have to make us believe that we're looking at 40 something Harrison Ford instead of 70 something Harrison Ford. Also, particularly in that scene, they altered Mr. Ford's face, but not his voice. And there is something a little incongruous about the fact that we can hear the sort of gravelly tenor of an old man, coming out of this handsome young mug with those striking blue eyes. I feel like these are quibbles, though. I think these are very minor and forgivable things to complain about.
My two quibbles are how they don't give enough context for why Helena is so able to do these like acrobatic feats, like jumping on the landing gear of a plane and climbing
Yeah,
into the cockpit and, things like that. Like, I would like them to have said that maybe she was with the circus or something, to give us a
right.
little
Yeah,
tiny sliver of context so that when she's doing this incredible, gymnastics, that we understand, okay, but she was an acrobat in the circus. So, okay, so she can do it. Like, without any context, it took me a little bit out of
sure.
the moment. And the other quibble I have is when Harrison Ford gets shot toward the end. And then there's this extended scene and he's got this bullet in him and he's talking and he's walking and he's acting like he's a normal person. And, he's shot in the upper chest. And like, I don't know about you, but if I was shot in the upper chest, I'd be lying on the ground going, if I was conscious at all. So I wish that either that he would have been completely out or
Mhm.
it would have been a much, more minor wound. So
Right.
we don't have to like suspend our disbelief because he's a 70 something year old man we know, and he's just been
Yeah,
shot. Like he cannot be acting as though he has a splinter. That to me is always a
sure.
problem in the film,
No,
in the
I mean, the
movies.
film, it kind of brings in his limitations as a 70 something
Yeah.
selectively, when
Yes.
there's something to be derived from it. But
Yes.
yeah, just as often it's waving it away. I mean, as someone who loves this genre, loves action adventure films, even ones that are far less accomplished than the Indiana Jones films, far more disreputable. Yes, kind of keeping a running tally of the injuries that our hero sustains. That's that just becomes kind of like one of the tropes of the genre that you just embrace. And as someone who was raised on again, I'm not even the Indiana Jones films are all PG or PG-13 rated movies. I think for most people they'd think that for older children probably fine. So, but I mean the 80s were kind of the apex of the super bloody, ultra violent, high body count action movie, and I
Right.
just ingested these without any thought of the consequences. I had this entirely fantasy based notion of what gun violence is, and certainly a gunshot wound, it's something that slows you down for a few minutes. Like no one ever suffers horrible life altering consequences as a result of being shot. So I, as a middle-aged person now, I feel much more ambivalence about the kind of entertainment that I enjoy and the extreme and frightening level of gun violence that's in my neighborhood and in the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is something that's has put a bit of a damper on the enjoyment of films in this genre. And again, I don't think the Indiana Jones movies are particularly egregious offenders in this regard. There are far worse ones, but as again, looking at a middle-aged person at my childhood and adolescent passions, that's just another thing I think about now.
I think it,
Mhm.
if people like us continue to talk about that, maybe the filmmakers will twig to it and either give people more minor wounds or give them the proper responses to being shot, so we have a more realistic view
Yeah.
of what's going
Well,
on.
I don't mean to get too far off topic here, but I mean this is something that I've thought about a lot and written about quite a bit, and how like sometimes when I've seen a film and I've my initial response has been to recoil from it, and I'll feel like that, oh, this is just wallowing in the horror and bloodshed of being shot, and and then I'll kind of it'll take me a little while, a few hours or days or years of reflection to say, no, that movie is actually just realistically depicting what happens when you've got a bullet in you. And I've kind of come around to the view that, as horrific and off-putting as that is, that's probably the more responsible way to depict it. We should not sell 11-year-olds like the one that I was, as I was, just gorging on these types of films, the idea that there's anything glamorous or cool or desirable about this.
That's a good point to end on. Well,
Sorry to
I
bring it down, everybody.
no, I think we've covered a lot of really cool stuff, talking about just this one movie. And I think, even though it's an action adventure film, there's a lot of fodder in there. There's a lot of food for thought and a
Yeah.
lot of, very interesting themes that if somebody goes to watch it, even knowing the plot, I think they could get a lot out of it. And just the relationship between Helena and Indy, I think there's so many layers of that. And then we didn't even get into the relationship between Indy and Helena's father, who was completely obsessed with this Dial of Destiny, and
Right. Right.
went quite crazy. And, it's a kind of little cautionary tale about
Yeah.
the risks of becoming obsessed and going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I mean that's a point in this film. I mean, it's certainly it's something that emerges over. We learn about the relationship that Indy had with the Helena character when she was a very young girl, and her father, who I think was Toby Jones,
Yes.
again, who we only see in the 1944 chapter of the film, was still alive. But that notion of becoming so obsessed with your object of pursuit, whether, and of course, in the case of the Indiana Jones movies, it's a physical thing. It's a MacGuffin. It's,
Right.
the Holy Grail, or the Ark of the Covenant, or, what is I'm trying to pronounce the name of the actual device that the Dial of Destiny is taken out, the anathic. Oh my God, I shouldn't even try. And this is terrible, because Smithsonian Magazine, we did actually publish a story about the Archimedes dial, which was okay, probably not capable of time travel, but it could predict the movement of stars and things. I mean, this was a very advanced astronomy device for its time. The Archimedes dial, which was okay, probably not capable of time travel, but it could predict the movement of stars and things. I mean, this was a very advanced astronomy device for its time. The previous films have dealt with the idea that becoming too invested in your pursuit or in your career, at the expense of your relationships and the people around you, is a self-defeating thing. It's a path to loneliness. And I think that, that's certainly present in this film, The Dial of Destiny, as you said. I mean, I think other movies like Last Crusade, which we've already discussed, foreground that theme a little more. Yeah, but it's important, and I think that is one of the things that gives these films a little more resonance and depth, beyond just being really exciting assemblies of fights and chases and things.
Yeah, like whenever you have ambivalence, whenever you
Mhm.
have reluctance, whenever you have, yes, you're pursuing
Mhm.
something, but you're also aware that the pursuit is dangerous, that gives a layer of humanity, and
Yeah.
it's like it gives shading, and that makes it more real and more meaningful and more emotionally resonant. And I think that's where this film lands. Why do you think, actually, we're not ending, because I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Why do you think this film didn't do as well at the box office as it might have, because we both enjoyed it so much?
Yeah, I mean, one just, very tangible, understandable reason is just the way these blockbusters are financed and marketed now. The overseas market, and particularly Asia, is much more a part of the calculus than it was in the 80s, when the Indiana Jones films were at their peak. And so a lot of people have written about how the fact that this movie did no business in China, and I think it's the first one of these to be released in China, so there's just no tradition of embracing these the way that, for example, the Fast and the Furious movies do much bigger business in China than they do domestically. But that's kind of a boring financial answer. I've been a little baffled by it. I mean, certainly this is an older franchise. I mean, if you saw Raiders of the Lost Ark in the theater, you are at least in your 40s, if not older. So you're out of the most eagerly pursued ticket buying demo. But I really thought this would have a much bigger commercial impact, particularly after Top Gun last year did so well. Because again, that is an 80s relic through and through. And there are a lot of similarities. I mean, it is a movie that foregrounds the age of its star in the story, and makes his the way in which that character is out of touch with the times a big centerpiece of the film. And that movie overperformed massively.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't have a good answer for this. I wish more people would see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I think it deserves more eyes on it than it has gotten.
Well, hopefully this will be an encouragement, because I think it's really a worthy film in the canon, and a lovely end to the story, a lovely, tying up, all the ribbons in a
Yes.
nice bow.
I will say to anyone who was staying away because they saw Crystal Skull and didn't like that one, and that's a movie that I don't even dislike as strongly as many, many people do, but this is a much stronger, much more satisfying film. So don't let that be your reason for staying away.
That's a good point. Well, Chris, if people are interested in reading your work, where can they find you these days?
So I archive everything at chrisklimek.net. The spelling of my last name is Klim as in medicine, EK. There's a .net after that. For as long as the social media platform formerly known as Twitter continues to exist and function, I am at CTKLIMEK. And please check out my Smithsonian Magazine podcast. There's more to that. That is on all the pod platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. There's more to that is the name of the show. So please seek that out. And thank you, Marcia. This has been a very lovely and informative conversation.
Thanks for coming on the show, Chris. It was really great chatting with you too. This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thanks for listening to the Real Mental Podcast. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com. While you're at it, why not check out my Ruthless Compassion podcast with over 140 episodes and counting? And if you have any ideas for guests for either Real Mental or Ruthless Compassion podcasts, please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com. Happy listening!